Welcome, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about lying and why it's never acceptable. I think it's a common trope for people typically to say that we have been lying for forever. Maybe a parent, when a kid asks for ice cream, the parent says, "No, it's spicy." And I think that's a common thing that parents tell, maybe some white lies. And look, we can have a conversation if that's rightfully so. It's not, by the way. But I can understand why they would do it because they're exhausted and they justify their lies. They justify their lies. So instead of "no, it's spicy," you could say, "Honey, this is mommy's ice cream. You can have yours later." Now, this rebuttal takes little bit more thought, but it's doing a couple things. It's one, being honest. This is my ice cream business. Get off of it. It's longer and it takes more thought on what you may have to say. And this becomes easier as you do it more and more because you understand that you don't have to search for these type of lies. But if you say "no, it's spicy," that child, I think most people think, "Oh, they'll never remember it." But later on, when they try ice cream, not every child, but some will remember when you said "no, it's spicy." And now some, especially the highly sensitive ones, and you can debate at how prolific that is, but it's becoming more and more prolific the more that we understand ourselves. They may now associate that parent with other lies. This is very similar to the white lie trope of, if my wife asks me if she looks fat, should I tell her the truth? Are you kidding me? Would I tell the truth if my wife asked if I were fat? No, probably not. Not if you don't want to make someone angry. But I think it's no different than you asking your wife something associated to something that you appreciate and love. It's not that you lie, because if you ask your wife if you look fat and you're being honest, and you tell me maybe you want her to lie, I don't want my wife to lie to me because if she lies then, when else does she lie? And if you say that, "Oh, it's a white lie," she doesn't do anything else. We're humans. We justify white lies. If we do something in consensual spaces, and first off, it's not even a consensual space because the two people don't even know that the other person's lying in theory. But even if it is in a consensual space like poker or something where people know that you're lying, that seeps into non-consensual spaces, and then you start justifying it through it as well. So really, at the end of the day, lies are laziness is bad. It's a lack of bandwidth that the individuals feel they have, and so instead of thinking creatively about the truth that they should say, they instead come up with a lie they think is justified because they think it's the least harmful to that person. So when we get a little bit further in this concept, we look at more extreme examples. Like, let's go with the doctor example next, because I think the Nazi example is the most prolific. But the doctor example is, a doctor may know a family for 60 years, been working with their family, knew the mother who is actually there, admitted currently, or maybe a grandmother, and the daughter is there, who this doctor has been working with as well. The doctor knows this daughter is extremely overwhelmed. She's, she just, was cheated on by her, husband, divorced, knows that, she lost her job. That doctor knows that, hey, if I tell her one more thing, she could go off the edge. They're already kind of thinking that. And so the mother that's there is actually terminally ill. The doctor knows that. But when the daughter comes up and asks, how's my mother going to do? The doctor thinks about all that and makes the summation that he's going to say, not to say he, to signify, men being the ones that lie. We could talk about that, but he says, she's going to be fine, sweetheart. When he knows that she's not. And some people would say that's mercy, but in my example here is we don't know what those people need. And so when you're lying to someone in that example, and oftentimes the majority of lies, you're doing it through a selfish lens, driven oftentimes by ego, and claiming it's for the betterment of that person. I mean, that just is so common. Like, first off, the white lie: should you tell your wife she looks fat? Probably not. But like, what if you did? I'd say if you wanted to be blunt over not, the person probably appreciates that. And if anything, it can start a conversation about um, being honest with one another and where those boundaries are. And so at the end of the day, when you think about these examples, before we go to the Nazi one, some of the reasons that I think about this is, the reasons for me are we don't know the outcomes of our lives. So when we talk about the white lies, when we talk about the doctor example, um, we think that we believe that our lies are going to drive individuals to the path that we think is accurate. But it's our path. And so, what if, for example, in the doctor example, the daughter needed somebody just to be honest with her? She's been searching for that for her entire life. Um, well, the doctor now took that from her because he thought that she couldn't handle it. And so it becomes very self fulfilling when you end up lying. And so when we go to the Nazi example here, um, and I think this is probably the quote unquote strongest view or strongest conversation. And I get why people go to the extreme examples because at the end of the day, most people can't justify lying. And if they do, they kind of have to hide it. And also, society is becoming more and more able to prominently capture who's lying. You look at AI, I think most of us can tell AI at kind of a hyper level that is kind of wild. And I think we're just a lot smarter than we think, and we're very seeking a very pattern seeking species. Um, and so, lying is first off, if you say lying is okay outside of extremes, people are going to look at you and say, well, where else do you lie? So I get why you have to go to the extremes. So that's why I'm trying to call them out. So the Nazi example, common trope in my thought process is, okay, Nazis come up to a door, you, the person speaking, are harboring Jewish people underneath your home. If you've ever seen The Inglourious Bastards, seemingly, I believe, opening scene or pretty close, where I think it's Christopher Waltz, the actor, amazing actor, by the way, knows multiple languages, um, comes in and asks if essentially he's harboring Jews. He essentially says no, from my understanding. I think it might have been more indirectly. But Walls knows he's lying. You could just tell that's really, I think, what Quentin is trying to say is that we know that you're lying, and maybe he meant to do this, but it goes to show that at the end of the day, that person that initially lied and said he didn't gave them up to save himself. Um, And so the question goes, should he have lied initially at the door? Should you lie and say, no, I'm not harboring any Jewish people? And most people would say, yeah, duh. Of course, that's what you should do. You're not going to say, yeah, they're underneath my floorboards. Go ahead. Um, but what I think is missing in the conversation, where I kind of draw the line, is that you don't have to lie to necessarily get the same outcomes. So, for example, what I like to think about is a creative truth. So, for example, this person coming up and asking if they're harboring Jewish people. Well, in the Inglorious Bastard example, Walls knew seemingly the entire time. So that person that lied initially thought that would save himself and them, but it didn't. The lie of the doctor example. The doctor lies to say that the mother's going to be fine because they think that the daughter can't handle it, but the daughter can. But they assume that the lie is going to have a different outcome. If my wife asks if she looks fat, should I tell her the truth? No, but you can have creative truth and say, "Hey, honey, you know, I think tonight I would love to see you in your red dress. You look sexy." And most of the time, women will catch on because they're also very intelligent people and know that it's not always what you say, it's how you say it. You can say that somebody doesn't maybe look as flattering in something, and it can be fat or just whatever. I think I put fat because that's always the one that seems to be the most aggressive, I guess, to this type of comment. Um, but this way, you're creatively telling the truth. You're directing them in a different arena. And then some people may say that, well, aren't you just lying because you're just kind of omitting? So that's another common thing is that, let me see, isn't omission lying? There's no omission lying or creative truth because that's what I think. I think to replace lying, you have to have creative truth telling. And what that essentially is saying is instead of saying, you look fat, you say, honey, I really would love to see you in the red dress. You look so sexy in that. Would you do that for me? And look, if she presses, then you can get into a conversation about whether she should even be asking you those questions. Because, look, if you lie, right, and say no, but then later on she goes out to the party and everyone thinks that she looks fat and it comes up, well, now she no longer trusts you. Or even if you think, oh, it's just one thing, but now she's not going to ask you about her clothing any longer. Or probably most likely not, unless you guys can have a deep conversation about it. But most likely you can't since you're lying about whether she doesn't look good. And then also you're even having that question asked by your wife. I think shows that you probably can't have those deep conversations. And so at the end of the day, what's going to happen is that she's going to no longer ask you about how she looks, and she's going to question whether you lie in other situations and where that line is. And rightfully so, she should, because humans do not do a great job of finding a line for things. We do a great job of justification. There's no doubt. And so when we think about omission, omission's not lying because language is just a vessel. So no, because language is just a vessel. So we omit every day, all the time. What we say, what we shouldn't say, non-verbally, etc., etc. So we're constantly choosing. So because we constantly choose, I'm not asking for us to do anything different. I'm just asking for us to to choose truth over lying because one, well, for many reasons, but to choose truth over lying because one, we don't know the outcome of our lies. Two, once we lie, we don't know exactly where those lies end. We're human, we're more likely to justify it, so we're going to use it more likely in different scenarios. Three, if other people were to find out that you lie, now your reputation is impacted. If it's your significant other, your partner, your parents, the people you care about, now those relationships have been alienated. Four, it hurts you first because now I mean, you could think about the soul. This is kind of the part of where I think that it kind of gets away from our innate human ideology. We come out of the womb wanting to interact and connect with other humans and to tell the truth. We can have a conversation about whether that's true because, well, children are constantly surmising to get something they want through lying, right? And that is true. I think that's just intelligence adapting through pattern recognition more so than their innate desire to do so. The reason why we lie at all these days is because of our inability to be connected to our core human values, right? It's because we're focused on money and dogs and paying bills and having conversations like this, which I think are super important, but it takes us away from what and who we are. And so lying does that. So telling the truth, we know that we're not going to hurt ourselves because what we're going to do is be honest. We're not going to hurt our reputation. We're going to be honest about it. And even deeper, if you think about it, creative truth telling is more has a better chance of actually obtaining the outcome that you want. Um, One, because when you're creative truth telling, you actually have to think deeper about what you're going to say and the situation that you're in. Whereas lying, it's oftentimes just a default because most people don't want to think about how to lie. It doesn't feel good. It gives you that kind of like icky feeling. And so most people have just a generic template they use. Whereas if you actually think creative truth telling, you're actually diving in deeper. So then you can choose your words more apt to the situation to obtain what you want while protecting your integrity, your reputation, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and so at the end of the day, there's no idea. So all those reasons, say if you start lying, you don't know how far you're going to go. Other people find out you're screwed. Your reputation's gone. When you tell the truth instead, you have to think deeper about the problem, which you can actually be creative in how you position things to actually get the outcome more likely while conserving your integrity and soul. Um, and then at the end of the day, the extreme examples are what it comes down to here. It's that, okay, what should I do? Well, first off, we don't know. We have to assume the Nazis probably when they come to your door, if they are, not always. Maybe they're doing door to door. I don't know. I guess that depends, right? If they did a one off with just your home, they probably know something, right? But if they're doing it door to door, okay, maybe less likely. Um, but still probably a red flag they're coming to your place. So you're assuming that if you lie, they're just gonna, okay, thanks, bye. No, like that's not gonna. What would they assume that somebody harboring Jewish people would do? They would say no. But what would they not expect? They might not expect something like this. Hey, are you harboring Jewish people in here? Why would I ever harbor Jewish people in here? Are you kidding me? I'm so disrespected. I work here as a citizen for the past 25 years. Get out of here because, and then stop there. Now, look, they're probably going to search regardless, um, but that actually may stop them from actually going in more so than a no. And if you think, okay, pushback invites more push from the Nazis, let's have a conversation about that. I don't necessarily know if I agree with that per se. I think that if you're convicted about something and you're not hiding. It's like when you're driving with the police officers, if you're going like 5 miles over and you even pass the cop, they oftentimes just go, okay, this person's not going to be that much of an idiot, and they're just going to kind of like let him. You just drive regular, but when you act kind of tense, that's when you're kind of looked at like, why are you so tense? And so if you're lying in this situation, you say no, you're more likely to give off a lie. Are you an actor? Do you know how to lie well? Probably not. And so you're more likely to actually give something off as well. In addition, you assume that that lie is going to have them just go, okay, thank you. Most likely they're going to check anyways. And so creative truth telling can be the aggressive route where you say, I work here, I would never do this. Or if you want to have creative truth telling, you could also hide them in a spot where you could creatively say that they are not in your home. So, for example, in Inglorious Bastards, I think they're underneath the home. I can't remember if it was, I think it was actually like something they dug out a dwelling as opposed to an actual like basement. So, in theory, you could say as a creative truth teller that I have no like I've worked here for 25 years. I would never do something like that, and of course they're not in my home. I would never harbor any Jewish people in my home. I know that you're going to search and look around, and that's completely fine. And they're not in your home technically; they're underneath your home. And then most people would say, "Well, isn't that just lying?" No, it's creative omission. We omit daily, and the important, and that's where we get into what are maybe what is creative truth telling, right? If we are constantly deciding what words to use, um, well, we have to understand that we're going to sometimes say things that we know we could say but don't. That happens all the time. So then, how do we justify in this situation classifying them being under the home as creative truth telling over lying? And the way that you do that is because, well, first off, what are the steps? Who we're trying to protect? One, we're trying to protect the speaker first. If we lie, right? If we lie, we've alienated the speaker. They're going to lie in other circumstances. They don't know where the line is, et cetera, et cetera. We can go down that line. But also, what happens after that is that you're also trying to protect the innocent. So you're trying to protect the speaker first, right? Speaker first. Lying alienates the speaker. Second, you're trying to protect the innocent, right? The innocent. And then you're trying to protect the community. And so because you're protecting yourself, you can't lie, right? You have to tell the truth as what you know, and we'll talk about what truth means after this. Um, then you protect the innocent. So my creative truth telling is going to be truthful, and I am knowingly omitting and being creative with my words to protect the innocent. But I'm telling the truth off the bat because I have to protect myself, and then that therefore protects the community, which is third. Um, and then we talk about, well, what is truth? Okay, we're talking about creative truth telling. What about Hitler, who thought that Jewish people were, uh, I don't even want to go down that path on what he thought they were, but not adequate for whatever reason, for a multitude of reasons. Um, how is his creative truth any different than my creative truth of trying to hide Jewish people from the Nazis? Uh, well, it comes down to intent and integrity, but intent really kind of drives integrity. Um, so intent, first off, we have a core set of human values that we follow, right? We're always looking to protect and connect with one another. If we had enough resources in the entire world, which we could argue that we do now, but if we had them spread appropriately, then we wouldn't fight, we would connect. And so the reason why we're doing it are for reasons outside of humanity per se. It's more in the things that guide humanity: religion, resources, food. But if we were to actually say, hey, what are human innate values? It's connection, right? Isolation kills humans. That's been shown. And yes, we could talk about monks and things like that, but like those are the outlier people that have come to a point in their life where they've grounded isolation in their day to day, and that's so challenging. That's why it's not done, often, and why they're looked at as they should be, as almost messiah for some. But well, what I would say is that it comes down to intent, and intent comes down to following behind those human values. So connection, not hurting human beings, not lying is definitely one of them, and I could go on and on and on for sure. Um, but those are the main items.